The Unraveling, a story of betrayal and truth. What would you do if you discovered that nearly 25% of married individuals admit to having an affair at some point in their lives? That statistic becomes devastatingly real when you're the one standing in your kitchen at 2:47 a.m., holding your spouse's phone, staring at messages that shatter everything you believed about your marriage. Marcus Thompson had always considered himself lucky. At 34, he had what most people would call a perfect life. A successful career as a software engineer, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Portland, and Sarah, his wife of 8 years, who worked as a marketing director for a local firm. They had met in college, dated for 4 years before marrying, and had built what seemed like an unshakable foundation of trust and love. The first crack in that foundation appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. As such, until much later, Sarah had been working late more frequently. A pattern that had developed gradually over the past 6 months. The Peterson campaign is demanding, she would explain, referencing the mayoral candidate her firm was representing. You know how these political clients can be. Marcus understood. His own work in tech meant irregular hours and occasional all-night. He trusted her completely, never questioning the extended absences or the way she guarded her phone more carefully than she used to. That Tuesday, Sarah came home at nearly midnight, apologizing profusely and explaining that the team had been in crisis mode over a leaked internal memo. She seemed genuinely frazzled, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled, her lipstick worn off. Marcus heated up the dinner he'd saved for her and listened as she vented about incompetent colleagues and impossible deadlines. Nothing seemed amiss, except for a nagging feeling he couldn't quite identify. The feeling grew stronger over the following weeks. Sarah's behavior had subtle shifts that Marcus began to notice. She hummed more often, spent longer getting ready in the mornings, and had developed a habit of taking her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. When he commented on her good mood, she attributed it to finally hitting her stride with the challenging campaign. One evening in early April, while Sarah was in the shower, her phone buzzed with a text message on the kitchen counter. At it reflexively, the way couples do when they share their lives openly, the message preview showed only a name, Alex, and the beginning of a text, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, ... Marcus felt a strange chill. Sarah had never mentioned anyone named Alex from her work. He knew most of her colleagues by name, had met many of them at company parties and work events. Alex was a new name. When Sarah emerged from the shower, Marcus casually asked about her plans for the next day. She mentioned the usual client meetings and strategy sessions. Nothing about seeing anyone named Alex. Marcus told himself he was being paranoid. That Alex could be anyone, a client, a new colleague, someone from another department he simply hadn't heard about yet. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a relationship counselor with 20 years of experience, explains that this is often how suspicions begin. Partners who are typically trusting don't suddenly become paranoid without cause, she notes. Usually, there are subtle changes in behavior, routine, or communication patterns that trigger an unconscious awareness that something has shifted in the relationship dynamic. Over the next month, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to details he'd previously overlooked. Sarah's explanations for her late nights became more elaborate and specific, as if she was building a more detailed fiction. She mentioned new restaurants she'd tried with colleagues during lunch meetings, places Marcus suggested they visit together, only to have Sarah dismiss them as not that great or overrated. Her phone, once casually left around the house, was now always face down and within arm's reach. The changes weren't dramatic enough to confront directly, but they were consistent enough to create a persistent unease. Marcus began experiencing what many in his situation describe: the exhausting mental gymnastics of trying to rationalize suspicious behavior, while simultaneously cataloging evidence of potential betrayal. Sarah's friend cluster had also shifted. She talked less about her longtime work friends, Jennifer, Michelle, and David, and more about new colleagues whose names seemed to change from conversation to conversation. Sometimes it was Alex, sometimes Jordan, occasionally Sam. The inconsistencies might have been innocent, but they formed a pattern that Marcus couldn't ignore. The emotional toll of constant suspicion is something Dr. Michael Chen, a psychologist specializing in relationship trauma, sees frequently in his practice. Living with unconfirmed suspicions creates a unique form of psychological stress, he explains. The person experiences symptoms similar to anxiety and depression, sleep disturbances, concentration problems, emotional numbness, and while simultaneously questioning their own perception and sanity. Marcus experienced all of these symptoms. His work performance began to suffer as he found himself distracted during meetings, running through conversations with Sarah in his mind. Looking for inconsistencies or clues he might have missed, his sleep became fitful. Analyzing Sarah's behavior from that day, wondering if her kiss goodnight felt different, or if her smile seemed forced. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in late May. Sarah announced that she would be attending a weekend retreat with her team, a last-minute planning session for the final push of the Peterson campaign. She would be leaving Saturday morning and returning Sunday evening. "It's at some resort about 2 hours south," she explained while packing her overnight bag. Apparently, Peterson believes in inspirational environments for brainstorming sessions. Typical politician ego, but the client pays well. Marcus helped her pack, noting that she included more clothes than seemed necessary for a business retreat, including the dress she'd worn on their anniversary the previous year. When he commented on it, she laughed and said, "You never know when there might be a nice dinner planned. I want to be prepared." To call that evening, Marcus spent the day doing yard work and catching up on personal projects, activities that usually brought him satisfaction but now felt mechanical and joyless. The house seemed too quiet, too empty, and his thoughts kept returning to the nagging doubts that had been building for months. That evening, Sarah called as promised. She sounded happy and relaxed, describing the resort's beautiful setting and the productive sessions they'd had. She was looking forward to sleeping in on Sunday morning before the final sessions. "I love you," she said before hanging up, words that should have brought comfort but instead felt like a scripted line in a play Marcus didn't understand. Unable to concentrate on anything, Marcus decided to take a drive. A destination, he found himself heading south on the interstate. Following the route Sarah would have taken to reach the resort, he told himself he was just getting some air, clearing his head, but deep down he knew he was looking for something or someone. 2 hours later, he was parked outside the Cascade Mountain Resort, the upscale conference center Sarah had described. The parking lot was nearly empty, unusual for a weekend that supposedly hosted a major campaign strategy retreat. Marcus sat in his car for an hour, watching the building, seeing only a handful of people come and go, none of whom he recognized as Sarah or her colleagues. The resort's front desk was staffed by a young woman who seemed eager to help. When Marcus approached, he explained that his wife was attending a conference there and that he wanted to surprise her with flowers. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any corporate events scheduled this weekend," she said apologetically. "We have a wedding reception tomorrow evening, but that's our only large group." Marcus felt the world tilt. "Are you sure? My wife said her marketing firm was holding a retreat here this weekend." The desk clerk checked her computer again. "No, sir, nothing like that. Would you like me to check if your wife is registered as an individual guest?" Marcus provided Sarah's name, knowing already what the answer would be. She wasn't registered. She had never been registered. The drive home took forever, and no time at all. Marcus felt as though he was floating outside his own body, observing someone else's life falling apart. The evidence was undeniable now. Sarah had lied about where she was spending the weekend. The careful construction of doubt that had been building for months collapsed into devastating certainty. Back home, Marcus sat in his living room, surrounded by pictures of their life together. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, images of holidays, and anniversaries and ordinary moments that had seemed precious just hours before. Now they felt like evidence of an elaborate deception. Props in a performance he hadn't known he was watching. The psychological impact of confirmed betrayal is immediate and overwhelming. According to Dr. Walsh, the discovery moment creates what we call betrayal trauma, a form of PTSD that occurs when someone we depend on for survival or safety violates that trust. The nervous system goes into shock because the person who should be our safe harbor has become the source of danger. Marcus experienced this shock as a physical sensation: nausea, dizziness, and a strange numbness that seemed to start in his chest and radiate outward. He found himself shaking, not from cold, but from the seismic shift in his understanding of reality. Sunday evening arrived with excruciating slowness. Marcus had spent the day in a strange, suspended state, going through the motions of normal weekend. activities while internally preparing for a confrontation he dreaded but knew was inevitable. He cleaned the house, did laundry, watched television, without seeing any of it, and waited. Sarah returned at exactly the time she'd promised, greeting Marcus with the same bright smile and enthusiastic kiss she'd always given him after time apart. She looked refreshed and happy, full of stories about the retreat that Marcus now knew were fabrications. "The sessions were incredible," she said, unpacking her bag in their bedroom. "Peterson is actually quite inspiring when you get him away from the cameras, and the resort was beautiful. You would have loved the hiking trails." Marcus watched her unpack, noting that nothing seemed out of place. Her clothes were appropriately wrinkled from travel, she had the conference materials and business cards she would have collected at a legitimate event. And her demeanor was perfectly consistent with someone who had spent the weekend in boring business meetings. The attention to detail in her deception was perhaps the most painful part of the discovery. This wasn't a spontaneous lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. This was a carefully orchestrated lie that required planning, props, and sustained performance. "How was your weekend?" Sarah asked, turning to give him her full attention with the same genuine interest she'd always shown in his activities. "Quiet," Marcus replied, the word barely audible. I missed you too," she said, and in that moment, Marcus almost believed her, almost convinced himself that he'd made a mistake, that there was some explanation that would make sense of the weekend's discoveries, but he had been to the resort. He had confirmed she wasn't there. The evidence was undeniable, no matter how much he wished it weren't. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside him, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling and wrestling with the most painful question of his life. How long had this been going on? The signs he'd been noticing for months suddenly took on new significance. The late nights, the changed behavior, the new names that came and went in her stories. All of it now seemed like obvious evidence of an affair that had been hidden in plain sight. Dr. Chen notes that this retroactive realization is common, and particularly traumatic. Once betrayal is confirmed, the betrayed partner often experiences a kind of mental archaeology, digging through months or years of memories and reinterpreting them through the lens of deception. This process can be more painful than the initial discovery because it calls into question the authenticity of seemingly every interaction and memory. Marcus found himself mentally replaying conversations, analyzing Sarah's expressions and reactions for signs of deception he'd missed. Had she been thinking about someone else when she told him she loved him? Had her enthusiastic responses to his stories about work been genuine or performed? How many times had she looked him in the eye and lied? The questions multiplied exponentially, each one more painful than the last. Monday morning brought the surreal experience of resuming normal routines while carrying the weight of devastating knowledge. Sarah got ready for work with her usual efficiency, chatting about her schedule and asking about Marcus's plans for the day. She kissed him goodbye at the door with apparent affection and reminded him that she might be late due to a client dinner. After she left, Marcus found himself alone with the deafening silence of a house that no longer felt like home. Every object seemed to mock him, the coffee mug Sarah had given him for their anniversary, the vacation photos on the refrigerator, the wedding ring he still wore on his finger. The urge to search for more evidence was overwhelming. Marcus knew Sarah's phone passcode. They had always shared such information as a matter of trust and convenience, but he had never used it to invade her privacy. Now, the passcode felt like the key to answers he desperately needed, but was terrified to find out. When Sarah came home that evening, again later than promised, Marcus made his decision. After she fell asleep, he carefully extracted her phone from the nightstand and retreated to the bathroom. The betrayal was worse than he had imagined. The text conversations with Alex, who turned out to be Alexandra, a photographer Sarah had met through work, painted a picture of an affair that had been ongoing for 7 months. The messages revealed not just physical infidelity, but emotional intimacy that felt like a deeper betrayal than sex. Sarah shared with Alexandra thoughts, dreams, and frustrations that she had stopped sharing with Marcus. She complained about feeling trapped in her marriage and fantasized about a different life. The weekend Marcus thought she had spent at a business retreat had actually been spent at Alexandra's cabin, a romantic getaway that included hiking, cooking together, and making plans for future trips. The photos in Sarah's deleted folder showed her laughing and relaxed in ways Marcus hadn't seen in months. Perhaps most devastating were the messages where Sarah expressed guilt and conflicted feelings about her marriage. She clearly still cared for Marcus, but felt their relationship had become routine and passionless. Rather than addressing these feelings within the marriage, she had found excitement and passion with someone else while maintaining the facade of a happy wife, Marcus read, until his eyes burned and his hands shook. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Fake work events, elaborate cover stories, and a network of lies that had allowed Sarah to live a double life for more than half a year. The physical evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional evidence was devastating. Sarah hadn't just cheated, she had built an entire relationship with someone else while pretending to be committed to her. Marriage, Dr. Walsh explains that this discovery of emotional infidelity alongside physical betrayal creates compound trauma. Physical affairs are devastating, but emotional affairs represent a deeper violation because they involve the sharing of intimate thoughts and feelings that should be reserved for the primary relationship. When both occur simultaneously, the betrayed partner must process not just sexual betrayal, but the loss of emotional exclusivity as well. Marcus returned the phone to the nightstand and sat on the bathroom floor until dawn, processing the magnitude of what he'd discovered. The Sarah he had been married to for 8 years, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, was largely a fiction. The real Sarah was someone who could lie effortlessly, maintain elaborate deceptions, and build an intimate relationship with another person while sharing a bed with her husband every night the next morning. Sarah noticed Marcus's exhausted appearance and expressed concern about his health. Her apparent genuine worry for his well-being felt like another layer of deception, or perhaps another glimpse of the complicated truth that she could simultaneously love and betray him. "You look terrible," she said, placing a hand on his forehead to check for fever. "Are you feeling okay?" Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. Was he feeling okay? His wife of 8 years was having an affair, had been lying to him for months, and was currently showing loving concern for his health while maintaining her deception. No, he was not feeling okay, just tired, he managed to say. "You should stay home today," Sarah suggested. "Rest up. I can pick up some soup on my way home." The kindness in her voice was genuine, which somehow made everything worse. This wasn't a movie villain who cackled while plotting his destruction. This was a confused, conflicted person who was capable of both love and betrayal, often simultaneously. After Sarah left for work, Marcus called in sick and spent the day researching infidelity, betrayal, trauma, and divorce proceedings. He read statistics about affair recovery, success rates for couples therapy, and the long-term psychological effects of betrayal. The information was both helpful and overwhelming. He learned that affairs like Sarah's long-term emotional and physical relationships with significant deception had lower reconciliation success rates than impulsive, shorter-term betrayals. He read about the stages of betrayal, recovery, shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually, for some, acceptance and healing. Marcus realized he was still in the shock phase, that his emotional response to the discovery was just beginning. The numbness he felt wasn't healing. It was his nervous system's protection against overwhelming trauma. That evening, Sarah came home with homemade soup from their favorite restaurant and genuine concern for Marcus's health. She felt his forehead again, asked about his symptoms, and offered to make him tea. Her care seemed authentic, which created a cognitive dissonance that was almost unbearable. How could someone who was betraying him so thoroughly still show such genuine care for his well-being? How could love and deception coexist so seamlessly in the same person? Dr. Chen explains this phenomenon as compartmentalization. People who engage in long-term deception often develop the ability to separate different aspects of their lives. Mentally, they can genuinely love their spouse while simultaneously maintaining an affair, experiencing both relationships as authentic in the moment they're engaged in them. This psychological insight provided some explanation, but little comfort. Marcus found himself studying Sarah's face as she cared for him, looking for signs of the person who had been lying to him for 7 months. He saw none. She seemed to be exactly who she had always been, his loving, attentive wife. The next few days passed in a surreal routine of normal married life built on a foundation of devastating secrets. Sarah continued her pattern of occasional late nights and weekend plans, now identified as times spent with Alexandra. Marcus continued his routine of work and home life, but everything felt mechanical and empty. The decision of whether and how to confront Sarah dominated his thoughts. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but the conversation that would follow felt like stepping off a cliff into an unknown future. Once he spoke the words, there would be no going back to the illusion of the marriage they'd had. Marcus consulted with a divorce attorney, not because he had decided to end the marriage, but because he needed to understand his options. The lawyer, a woman in her 50s who had been handling family law for 20 years, was kind but direct. "The choice to try to work through infidelity is deeply personal," she explained. "Some couples do recover and build stronger relationships, but it requires absolute honesty from the unfaithful partner, a complete end to the affair, and a willingness from both parties to do very difficult emotional work. The fact that your wife's affair has been ongoing for months and involves significant deception makes the path to reconciliation more challenging." She provided Marcus with resources for counseling and support groups, while also explaining the practical aspects of divorce proceedings. Having the information felt empowering, even if he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. The weekend arrived with another test of Sarah's honesty. She announced plans to attend a team-building event on Saturday afternoon, saying she'd be home by evening. Marcus no longer believed any of her explanations, but he didn't confront her directly. Instead, he decided to follow her dot. The decision to engage in surveillance felt like a betrayal of his own values, but Marcus needed to see the scope of Sarah's deception with his own eyes. He told himself he was gathering information needed to make informed decisions about their future. Sarah left the house dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, carrying a small overnight bag she claimed contained a change of clothes for the evening's team dinner. Marcus followed at a distance, his heart pounding with anxiety and dread. Instead of heading to her office or any business location, Sarah drove to a residential neighborhood across town. She parked in front of a charming craftsman house with a well-maintained garden and window boxes full of flowers. Marcus watched from down the street as Sarah used a key to let herself into the house. The casual intimacy of that moment, Sarah having a key to someone else's home, entering without knocking as if she belonged there, was somehow more devastating than the explicit text messages Marcus had read. It represented a level of domestic intimacy that spoke to a relationship far beyond casual affair. Marcus sat in his car for 3 hours, watching the house and occasionally seeing figures move past the windows. He saw Sarah and another woman, presumably Alexandra, cooking together in the kitchen. Their movements synchronized in a way that spoke to comfort and familiarity. The woman he glimpsed appeared to be in her early 30s, tall and athletic, with short, dark hair. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that she was attractive, and that she and Sarah moved around each other with the easy intimacy of an established relationship. At one point, Marcus saw them embrace in front of the kitchen window, and the tenderness of the gesture was more painful than anger or passion would have been. This wasn't just about sex or excitement. Sarah had built a genuine relationship with this person. As the afternoon faded into evening, Marcus realized he couldn't continue watching. The surveillance had provided confirmation he didn't really need, but it had also shown him a version of Sarah he'd never seen, relaxed, natural, and genuinely happy in a way she hadn't been at home in months. The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Marcus felt vindicated in his suspicions, but devastated by their confirmation. He had proof of Sarah's infidelity, but no idea what to do with that information. Sarah returned home at nearly midnight, apologizing for the late hour and explaining that the team dinner had run longer than expected. She seemed genuinely tired and slightly buzzed from wine, details that might have been authentic or carefully crafted performance. "How was your day?" she asked, settling into bed beside him with the same casual intimacy they'd shared for 8 years. "Quiet," Marcus replied, the same response he'd given weeks earlier but now weighted with entirely different meaning. Sarah snuggled against him with apparent contentment, and Marcus lay awake listening to her breathing as she fell asleep. The physical closeness felt surreal after what he'd witnessed that afternoon. The woman sleeping peacefully against his shoulder had spent the day in another person's home. cooking and laughing and embracing someone else with genuine affection. Next morning brought another performance of domestic normalcy. Sarah made coffee, asked about Marcus's plans for Sunday, and suggested they take a walk together later in the afternoon. Her behavior was indistinguishable from the loving wife she'd always been. Except now Marcus knew it was only part of the story. They did take that walk. Through their neighborhood and past the park where they'd often gone during their early years of marriage, Sarah seemed relaxed and talkative, pointing out changes in neighbors' gardens and asking about Marcus's recent work projects with what appeared to be genuine interest. For moments during that walk, Marcus almost forgot what he knew. Sarah's presence felt authentic and familiar, and he found himself responding naturally to her conversation and laughter. The cognitive dissonance was extreme. This felt like his wife, the woman he'd fallen in love with years earlier. But he now knew she was living a double life that included deep intimacy with someone else. Dr. Walsh notes that this experience of conflicting realities is common in betrayal situations. The unfaithful partner often continues to be authentically present in their primary relationship, even while maintaining an affair. This isn't necessarily calculated deception. People are capable of experiencing genuine emotions in multiple relationships simultaneously. This complexity makes the betrayal more confusing and painful for the betrayed partner, who must reconcile the authentic love they see with the devastating deception they've discovered. That evening, Marcus made the decision to confront Sarah. The weight of carrying the knowledge alone had become unbearable, and the performance of normalcy felt like participating in his own betrayal. He waited until after dinner, when they were sitting in their living room with the television on, but neither of them really watching. "Sarah," he said, his voice sounding strange in his own ears, "we need to talk." Something in his tone caused Sarah to look at him sharply. For the first time in months, Marcus saw a genuine alarm in her expression, as if she recognized that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble. "What's wrong?" she asked, muting the television and turning. To face him fully, Marcus had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in his mind. But now that it was here, the words seemed impossible to speak. Once he said them, their marriage as he had known it would be over, regardless of what happened next. "I know about Alexandra," he said simply. The change in Sarah's expression was immediate and devastating. The color drained from her face, and her eyes filled with an emotion Marcus had never seen there before. The look of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. "Marcus, she began, but the words died in her throat. "I know about the weekend retreat. That never happened. I know about the late nights and the team dinners and all of it. I know you've been lying to me for months." Sarah's hands began to shake. She opened her mouth several times as if to speak, but no words came. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 7 months of deception finally brought into the light. "How long have you known?" she finally whispered. "Long enough," Marcus replied. "The question is, how long has this been going on?" Sarah's composure crumbled entirely. Tears began streaming down her face as 8 years of marriage reached a moment of devastating truth. 7 months, she said, in a voice barely audible. "It's been 7 months." The confirmation was somehow both a relief and a new devastation. Marcus had known the timeline from reading her messages, but hearing Sarah speak it aloud made it undeniably real. "Do you love her?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with a question he hadn't planned to voice. Sarah's sob in response was answer enough, but she spoke anyway. "Yes, I do. But Marcus, I love you too. I know that doesn't make sense, and I know how awful this is, but it's true." The complexity of her response was exactly what Marcus had feared. This wasn't a simple story of a marriage gone wrong and a clear path forward. This was a situation where multiple truths existed simultaneously. Sarah loved him. Sarah loved Alexandra. Sarah had been deceiving him for months, and Sarah was genuinely devastated to have hurt him. "How could you do this?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking for the first time since the conversation began. "How could you share our bed and tell me you loved me while you were building a life with someone else?" Sarah's response was interrupted by heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. When she could finally speak, her words came out in fragments. "I never meant for it to happen. I met her at the Henderson Industries campaign launch, and we just connected. It started as friendship, But then it became something more, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't want to stop it. Why didn't you just leave? Marcus asked. If you wanted to be with her, why didn't you just end our marriage? Because I didn't want to lose you either, Sarah said through her tears. I know how selfish that sounds, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing what we had. I thought maybe I could figure out a way to make it work, or maybe the feelings for her would fade, or maybe you'd never have to know. The selfishness of that reasoning was staggering, but Marcus could hear the genuine anguish in Sarah's voice. She wasn't a calculating villain. She was a confused, conflicted person who had made devastating choices while trying to avoid losing either relationship. But you were willing to let me live a lie, Marcus pointed out. You were willing to let me believe we had a marriage. We didn't actually have. I convinced myself that what we had was still real, Sarah said. That my feelings for you hadn't changed. That our marriage was still authentic, even if I was also involved with someone else. Dr. Chen explains that this rationalization is common among people engaged in long-term affairs. The unfaithful partner often develops elaborate justifications that allow them to maintain both relationships without seeing themselves as fundamentally deceptive. They may genuinely believe that their marriage remains valid and authentic, despite the affair, compartmentalizing the two relationships as separate but equally real parts of their lives. The conversation continued for hours, with Sarah alternating between desperate apologies and attempts to justify her actions. She explained that her relationship with Alexandra had developed gradually, starting as professional collaboration, moving to friendship, and eventually becoming romantic and sexual. She insisted that her love for Marcus had never diminished, even as she acknowledged building deep intimacy with someone else. Marcus found himself asking questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Where did they meet? How often did they see each other? What did they talk about? Did Alexandra know about him? The answers painted a picture of a fully developed relationship that paralleled Sarah and Marcus's marriage. Sarah and Alexandra saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes for work-related activities that provided cover, but often simply to spend time together. They had developed inside jokes, shared interests, and future plans. Alexandra knew about Marcus and felt conflicted about the situation, but hadn't pressured Sarah to leave her marriage. She said the choice had to be mine, Sarah explained. She didn't want to be responsible for breaking up my marriage, but she also couldn't keep sharing me indefinitely. The revelation that Alexandra had been patient and understanding somehow made the situation more complicated. She wasn't a predatory figure who had seduced Sarah away from her marriage. She was someone who had genuinely fallen in love and been willing to accept a complicated situation temporarily while hoping for resolution. As dawn approached, Marcus and Sarah sat exhausted on their couch, surrounded by used tissues and the wreckage of their marriage. The conversation had covered the timeline of the affair, the practical details of Sarah's deception, and the emotional complexity of her divided loyalties. What happens now? Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Marcus realized he didn't. No. The confrontation he had dreaded and anticipated had finally occurred, but it hadn't provided the clarity he had hoped for. Instead, it had revealed even more complexity and ambiguity than he had imagined. I don't know, he admitted. I need time to think. Sarah nodded, seeming to understand that the conversation had reached its limit for the night. They went to bed. In the same room they had shared for years, but everything felt different. The physical space was the same, but the emotional territory had been permanently altered. Over the next several days, Marcus and Sarah existed in a strange liminal space between their old marriage and whatever their future might hold. Sarah ended her relationship with Alexandra, a decision that seemed to cause her genuine grief, but which she insisted was necessary for any chance of repairing their marriage. I told her that I needed to focus on my marriage, Sarah explained. To Marcus, that it wasn't fair to either of you for me to keep trying to maintain both relationships. The end of the affair should have felt like progress, but Marcus found himself struggling with unexpected emotions. Part of him was relieved that Sarah had chosen their marriage, but another part of him was troubled by the pain her decision had clearly caused her. Sarah's genuine sadness about ending her relationship with Alexandra was another reminder of how real and meaningful that connection had been. Marcus began individual therapy to process his trauma and confusion. Dr. Patricia Ross, the counselor, he chose, specialized in betrayal, recovery, and had extensive experience helping people navigate the aftermath of infidelity. Your situation is particularly complex, Dr. Ross explained during their first session, because your wife's affair involves significant emotional intimacy alongside the physical relationship. She didn't just cheat. She developed what was essentially a second marriage while maintaining your primary marriage. The therapeutic process helped Marcus understand that his conflicting emotions were normal, and that recovery from this kind of betrayal was measured in years, not months. Dr. Ross explained that he was likely to experience waves of different emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, hope, despair, often cycling through multiple feelings in a single day. Meanwhile, Sarah had begun her own therapy and was working to understand how she had been able to maintain such extensive deception. Her therapist was helping her explore the psychological mechanisms that had allowed her to compartmentalize two relationships and the underlying issues in her marriage that had made her vulnerable to the affair. "I think I was feeling invisible. In our marriage," Sarah explained to Marcus during one of their careful conversations, "not because you were neglectful, but because we had fallen into such predictable routines that I felt like I was disappearing. Meeting Alexandra made me feel seen and interesting again." This insight was both helpful and painful. Marcus could acknowledge that their marriage had become routine and that they had both taken each other for granted, but that recognition didn't justify Sarah's response. Many couples experienced periods of disconnection without one partner developing a secret relationship with someone else. Sarah and Marcus began couples counseling with Dr. Janet Kim, a therapist who specialized in affair recovery. Dr. Kim explained that successful recovery required what she called radical honesty. From both partners, Sarah needed to be completely transparent about her actions and motivations, while Marcus needed to be honest about his own contributions to their marital problems and his capacity for forgiveness. "Recovery doesn't mean returning to your old marriage," Dr. Kim explained. "The marriage you had before is over. The question is whether you can build a new marriage based on deeper honesty and connection." The therapeutic process was grueling. Sarah had to recount details of her affair that were painful for Marcus to hear, while Marcus had to examine his own role in their marital disconnection. They explored communication patterns, unmet needs, and the gradual erosion of intimacy that had occurred over years of busy careers and taken for granted routines. One of the most difficult aspects of recovery was Sarah's continued grief over losing her relationship with Alexandra. While Marcus appreciated her honesty about these feelings, it was devastating to witness his wife mourning the loss of another relationship while supposedly working to repair their marriage. "I know it hurts you to see me sad about ending things with her," Sarah said during one particularly difficult conversation, "but pretending I don't miss her would just be another form of deception." Dr. Kim supported Sarah's honesty while helping Marcus understand that her grief was actually a positive sign. If Sarah could end a 7-month relationship without emotional impact, it would suggest a capacity for emotional detachment that would be troubling for your marriage recovery, she explained. Her sadness demonstrates the depth of her emotional capacity, which is ultimately good news for your relationship. Marcus and Sarah had made significant progress in understanding what had happened and why. They had developed new communication skills, identified the warning signs that had preceded the affair, and created agreements about transparency and accountability that would help prevent future betrayals. But understanding the affair and developing tools for prevention didn't automatically repair the trust that had been shattered. Marcus continued to experience triggers, moments when doubt and suspicion would overwhelm him, despite rational evidence that Sarah was being honest. Sarah's phone buzzing, her working late, or even her laughing at something he hadn't heard could send Marcus into emotional spirals that reminded him of the months when his instincts had been telling him something was wrong. That had developed during the period of suspicious behavior didn't simply disappear once the truth was revealed. Marcus found himself analyzing Sarah's expressions, cataloging her explanations for time away from home, and searching for inconsistencies that might indicate new deceptions. The mental exhaustion of constant suspicion was as draining during recovery as it had been during the affair itself. Sarah, meanwhile, was learning to live with the consequences of her choices. Every late meeting at work now required detailed explanation and verification. Her phone was an open book, with passcodes shared and messages available for Marcus to read at any time. The privacy she had once taken for granted was gone, possibly forever. "I know I gave up the right to privacy when I chose to deceive you," Sarah told Marcus during one of their therapy sessions, "but sometimes it feels like I'm living under surveillance, waiting for you to find evidence of something I'm not doing." Dr. Kim helped them understand that this period of hypervigilance and lost privacy was normal and necessary. Trust is rebuilt gradually through consistent, transparent behavior over time, she explained. Sarah needs to demonstrate trustworthiness through actions, not just words. And Marcus needs to see that demonstration repeatedly before his nervous system will begin to relax. The process was complicated by well-meaning friends and family members who had opinions about what Marcus should do. His sister Rebecca was adamant that he should leave Sarah immediately. "Once a cheater, always a cheater," she declared during a family dinner. "You deserve better than someone who could lie to your face for 7 months." His best friend David offered a different perspective. Marriage is about forgiveness and working through problems together. If you love her and she's willing to do the work, maybe you can come out stronger. Marcus's parents, married for 35 years, shared their own story of surviving infidelity early in their marriage. "Your father had an affair when you were 3 years old," his mother revealed in a conversation that shocked Marcus. "We almost divorced, but we chose to fight for our marriage instead. It was the hardest thing we ever did, but we don't regret it." The revelation that his parents had faced a similar crisis and chosen to stay together provided Marcus with a different model for understanding betrayal and recovery. He had grown up believing their marriage was perfect, never knowing about the crisis that had nearly ended it. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own network of friends and family, many of whom were struggling to understand how someone they thought they knew could have maintained such an elaborate deception. Her best friend Linda was particularly harsh in her judgment. "I don't understand how you could do that to Marcus," Linda said during a confrontational conversation. "He's one of the kindest men I know, and you betrayed him in the worst possible way." Sarah's shame was overwhelming at times. She was learning to live with the knowledge that she had caused devastating pain to someone she loved, that she had acted in ways that violated her own stated values, and that she had damaged relationships with friends and family members who were struggling to reconcile her actions with the person they thought they knew. The social isolation that followed the affair's revelation was something neither Marcus nor Sarah had anticipated. Couples they had socialized with for years seemed uncomfortable around them, unsure how to navigate the awkwardness of knowing about the betrayal. Some friends took sides, creating divisions in their social circle that added additional stress to an already difficult situation. 1 year after the confrontation, Marcus and Sarah were still working on their marriage, but had made significant progress. They had developed new rituals of connection, daily check-ins about their emotional states, weekly date nights that prioritized conversation over entertainment, and monthly relationship review sessions where they discussed what was working and what needed attention. Sarah had changed jobs, partly to remove herself from the environment where she had met Alexandra, and partly to demonstrate her commitment to creating new patterns in her life. The career change came with a salary reduction, but both she and Marcus agreed it was a necessary sacrifice for their recovery. "I needed to prove to myself as much as to you that I could make different choices," Sarah explained to Dr. Kim. "Staying in the same job felt like I was trying to recover while remaining in the environment where I had made my worst decisions." Marcus had also made changes, recognizing that their marriage's recovery required transformation from both partners. He had begun prioritizing their relationship in ways he hadn't before the affair, scheduling time for conversation and intimacy that he had previously left to chance. "I realized that I had been coasting in our marriage," Marcus admitted during therapy. "Not in a way that justified Sarah's affair, but in a way that meant I wasn't actively investing in our connection. I was taking our relationship for granted." The most difficult aspect of recovery was learning to live with the permanent change in their relationship's foundation. The innocence and easy trust of their early marriage was gone forever, replaced by a more conscious and deliberate form of commitment. Dr. Kim helped them understand that this transformation wasn't necessarily negative. Many couples who successfully recover from infidelity report that their post-affair marriage is actually stronger and more intimate than their original marriage, she explained. The crisis forces a level of honesty and intentionality that many couples never achieve, but the path to that deeper intimacy was long and often painful. Marcus struggled with intrusive thoughts about Sarah and Alexandra together, images and scenarios that would appear unbidden and cause intense emotional pain. Sarah wrestled with guilt and shame that sometimes made her feel unworthy of Marcus's forgiveness and effort. 2 years after the affair's discovery, Marcus faced a new challenge. Alexandra reached out to him directly. The contact came through LinkedIn, a professional networking message that began innocuously but quickly revealed its true purpose. Alexandra explained that she had been struggling with guilt about her role in the affair and wanted to apologize to Marcus directly. "I know I have no right to contact you," she wrote, "but I needed you to know that I never intended to cause you pain. I fell in love with Sarah, and I allowed that love to override my judgment about the situation. I'm deeply sorry for the role I played in hurting your marriage." Marcus showed the message to Sarah, who was visibly shaken by the contact. They discussed it in therapy, exploring the complex emotions it brought up for both of them. "Part of me appreciates her apology," Marcus told Dr. Kim, "but another part of me is angry that she's inserting herself into our recovery process. We've worked so hard to move forward, and this feels like it's pulling us backward." Sarah's reaction was more complicated. She admitted to feeling a mix of sadness, nostalgia, and concern about Alexandra's emotional state. The message suggested that Alexandra was struggling with the aftermath of their relationship's end, information that caused Sarah both grief and guilt. "I'm worried about her," Sarah confessed, "but I also know that my concern for her well-being isn't fair to you or to our marriage." Dr. Kim helped them process the contact as another test of their recovery. Marcus chose not to respond to Alexandria's message, and Sarah agreed not to initiate any contact despite her concern. It was a difficult decision that required both of them to prioritize their marriage over individual emotional impulses. The incident reinforced an important lesson about recovery. Healing from infidelity isn't a linear process with a clear endpoint. It involves ongoing choices to prioritize the marriage and new challenges that test the strength of renewed commitment. 3 years after the affair's discovery, Marcus and Sarah reached a milestone they had once thought impossible. A period of several months without major triggers or crises, their new marriage had developed its own rhythm and character, different from their original relationship but authentic in its own way. They had learned to communicate with a level of honesty that was sometimes uncomfortable but ultimately strengthening. Sarah had developed transparency habits that went far beyond what most marriages required, while Marcus had learned to voice his needs and concerns instead of suffering in silence. "We know each other differently now," Sarah reflected during one of their monthly relationship reviews. "Before, we knew each other's habits and preferences, but we didn't really know each other's depths. The crisis forced us to explore parts of ourselves and our relationship that we had never examined." Marcus agreed, though he acknowledged that the knowledge had come at a tremendous cost. "I wouldn't recommend infidelity as a path to marital growth," he said with dark humor, "but I can't deny that we understand each other and ourselves better now than we did before." Their physical intimacy had also evolved through the recovery process. The casual, comfortable sexuality of their early marriage had been replaced by something more intentional and conscious. Every intimate encounter carried the weight of choice and recommitment, making their physical connection more meaningful but also more fragile. "Sex used to be something we did naturally, without much thought," Marcus explained to Dr. Kim. "Now it feels like a gift we choose to give each other, which makes it more precious but also more complicated." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I'm more aware now of what intimacy means and what it costs. I can't take it for granted the way I used to." As they approached the 4th anniversary of the affair's discovery, Marcus and Sarah began discussing whether to continue couples therapy. They had been meeting with Dr. Kim monthly for nearly 4 years, and while the sessions remained helpful, they were also ready to test their ability to maintain their new marriage without professional guidance. "You've both done remarkable work," Dr. Kim told them during what would be their final regular session. "You've transformed a crisis into an opportunity for growth, which is the best possible outcome for a situation like yours. But recovery is an ongoing process, not a destination. The tools you've learned here will need to be practiced and maintained for the rest of your marriage." She reminded them that they could return for tune-up sessions whenever they felt the need. And she provided them with resources for continued growth and maintenance of their relationship. Looking back on the 4-year journey from discovery to recovery, Marcus could see how much both he and Sarah had changed. The naive trust of their early marriage had been replaced by conscious choice and deliberate commitment. They had learned to create safety through transparency and accountability. Rather than assumption and hope, Sarah had become someone capable of taking full responsibility for her actions and their consequences. The woman who had been able to maintain elaborate deceptions for 7 months had developed almost compulsive honesty, sometimes sharing thoughts and feelings that would have been better kept private in service of absolute transparency. Marcus had learned to voice his needs and concerns immediately rather than allowing resentment to build silently. The man who had suffered through months of suspicion without confronting his wife had developed the ability to address problems. When they were small, rather than waiting for them to become crises, their marriage had become something neither of them had imagined possible. A relationship built on conscious choice rather than unconscious habit, on earned trust rather than assumed loyalty, on demonstrated commitment rather than spoken promises. But the cost of that transformation had been enormous. The innocence and ease of their early love was gone forever, replaced by something more deliberate and hard-won. They had paid for their deeper intimacy with years of pain, therapy, and careful reconstruction of their entire relationship. 5 years after the discovery of Sarah's affair, Marcus could finally say with confidence that they had survived. Just that their marriage had continued, but that they had created something new and valuable from the wreckage of betrayal. Their relationship bore scars that would never fully heal, but it also possessed a strength and intentionality that their original marriage had lacked. The anniversary of the confrontation had become, surprisingly, a day of celebration rather than mourning. Each year, they marked the date as the beginning of their new marriage, acknowledging both the pain of that night and the growth that had followed. "I'm not glad you had an affair," Marcus told Sarah on the 5th anniversary of his discovery of her betrayal, "but I'm grateful for who we've become because of how we chose to respond to it." Sarah's response reflected the complexity of their journey. "I will regret hurting you for the rest of my life, but I won't regret that it led us to this deeper connection." Their story had become one of transformation rather than simple reconciliation. They had learned that surviving infidelity wasn't about returning to their previous marriage, but about having the courage to build something entirely new from the foundation of their commitment to each other. The statistics about infidelity recovery are sobering. Most marriages don't survive affairs, and of those that do, many remain damaged and diminished. But Marcus and Sarah had beaten the odds by choosing to do the difficult work of radical honesty, therapeutic intervention, and conscious reconstruction of their relationship. Their marriage now served as a testament to the human capacity for forgiveness, growth, and transformation. It wasn't the story they had planned to write, but it had become a story they were proud to live. Looking toward the future, Marcus and Sarah knew that their marriage would always require more attention and intention than most. The trust they had rebuilt was strong but not unbreakable, and maintaining it would require ongoing effort from both of them. They had learned that love wasn't just a feeling, but a choice made daily through actions large and small. They had discovered that forgiveness was a process rather than a moment, requiring ongoing decisions to choose healing over resentment. Most importantly, they had proven to themselves and each other that even the most devastating betrayals could be transformed into opportunities for deeper connection and stronger commitment. Their story offered hope to others facing similar crises, while acknowledging the tremendous cost and effort required for successful recovery. It demonstrated that marriages could survive infidelity, but only when both partners were willing to do the difficult work of creating something new. From the ashes of what had been destroyed, the trust that had been shattered through deception was being rebuilt through consistency, transparency, and time. The love that had been complicated by divided loyalties was being purified through choice and commitment. The marriage that had been built on assumptions was being reconstructed on conscious decisions and shared values. Marcus and Sarah's journey from betrayal to recovery had taken 5 years of intensive work, but they had emerged with a relationship that was more honest, more intentional, and more resilient than their original marriage had ever been. Their story served as both warning and hope. warning about the devastating consequences of infidelity and the years of pain required for recovery, but also hope about the human capacity for forgiveness, growth, and transformation, even in the face of the most profound betrayals. In the end, they had learned that surviving infidelity wasn't about forgetting what had happened or returning to innocence. It was about choosing to build something new and better from the broken pieces of what had been lost, creating a love that was stronger because it had been tested and chosen rather than simply assumed. The question that had haunted Marcus during those early days, how could someone I love and trust betray me so completely, had been answered not through explanation, but through transformation. The answer wasn't found in understanding why the betrayal had occurred, but in choosing how to respond to it. Their marriage had become a testament to the possibility of redemption, the power of forgiveness, and the human capacity to create meaning and beauty even from the most painful experiences. It wasn't the story they had planned to write, but it had become a story worth telling.